Hey everyone, and welcome to Groove Builders, the show where we create together. I'm your host, Disorderly Cone. Time for Machine, a company that prides themselves in offering a premium model solution, often mechanical, to the 3D metal model community. Now, I think we've covered some of their controversies here on the show. Yep, we've definitely covered some of their controversies here on the show. However, the Time for Machine has really been trying to change that image. And one way they've been doing that is by sending me some really cool stuff to review, like that dream van and now this luxury Roadster. And it has to be said, for them to send me these things as someone who's been actively critical of them in the past, they must really believe in their product. So I gotta give it to them, and that's why I'm extremely excited to take a look at the luxury Roadster. Now that we've gotten some of that stuff out of the way, we can get to the important stuff. Like, what tools do we need to build the luxury Roadster? What are the hard parts? And will it actually work? These are all great questions, Groovers, and we're gonna get the answers. Let's get down to the workbench and take a look at our package. And boom! There we have it, our Time for Machine Luxury Roadster instructions. Let's go ahead and open this up and see what we have. The first thing here on our left, we have a quick overview of everything that comes in our kit. And then, on the right here, we have an overview of all the icons that we'll find throughout our instructions. These kind of tell us little key things that we need to know as we're assembling our build. Let's take a look at these instructions. Ah, yes! These are very clearly laid out. I like how clean these are. Okay, now looking at our first page, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty just yet, but we can see where we get our parts from up here on the upper left. Everything that's in green is what we need to pop out. Then on the right here, just right here, we can see each and every part and what it's supposed to look like when it comes out of the metal. Don't forget to file these pieces. And then down below, we can see how we're supposed to form everything and how it all comes together by these little green arrows. It's really important, and you're gonna hear me say this multiple times throughout this video. Paying attention to how these pieces are orientated is the key to getting everything to work smoothly here. Now, some of these bends do look a little bit tricky, and we're gonna need some special tools to get these done. We better talk to our tool expert. Timothy?
Another mechanical model, and this one from Time for Machine? The complexity is truly to be admired, and while they do provide you tools like a rasp and pliers, you will also need mandrills, tweezers, and tapping punches. I call shotgun!
Thanks, Timothy, and you and Jimmy One are gonna have to work that out. I'm not getting involved. I got white gloves on now. As always, these are just our suggestions, and you really don't need anything but the tools that are provided from Time for Machine to build this model. However, having these extra tools will make everything a lot easier for you. Alright, Groovers, we've looked at our instructions and we have all our tools. There's only one thing left for you to do, and that's to press that like and subscribe button. We're currently trying to get to 4,000 subscribers and really could use your help. No pressure though. No pressure at all. Nope. Just building cool stuff. Yep. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see you here in future builds when we build some really neat stuff. All right, Groovers, let's get down to the workbench and get this thing built. The Time for Machine Luxury Roadster is a build that truly shines to that little engineer in all of us. With its mix of mechanical engineering and style, it's no wonder that this build has become a collector's item amongst metal model builders. I've already stated before that these models aren't your typical metal model and are more for those who really enjoy tinkering. Let's get started, shall we? First things first, let's talk about building our gears and bending some of that seat detail. When it comes to our gears, it can't be understated that ensuring their complete smoothness is the key to getting everything to work correctly. When we take our pieces out of our metal sheets, they tend to have these little pieces left over. These little things are called burrs, and although I don't show a whole lot of filing on camera, you better believe that all of my parts have been filed down. When it comes to filing, you only need to do this until you reach the part. going any further might accidentally ruin it, so be very careful just to get the burr off. Another important thing to remember is to pay attention to the detail in the instructions on how these parts are supposed to be orientated. The gear placement is super important. If you place the gear backwards, you'll have to go back later and take apart the entire assembly and rearrange everything. It's a lot more work. Avoid this from the beginning and double check everything before securing your pieces together. I know this can be a little bit easier said than done, because I made this mistake a few times while attempting this build. So don't be me, take your time and double check your work. Now, we're just going to make sure these gears are tight and straight. Having any wobble in our gears will actually affect the ability for our car to move correctly. Okay, we're looking pretty good. Let's move on to our seat detail. When it comes to bending some of our thicker pieces, like our seats, we need to pay attention to how much of the metal needs to be bent. We can get a good understanding of this by looking at the green lines in the instructions. These green lines mimic the proper shape of our pieces that we need to form. I personally recommend bringing your part over to the instructions and bending it with these indicators. To help get a nice rounded edge, I recommend using a forming tool here, like a dapping set or maybe a big marker. I typically like to start big and then work my way down to the proper size. This way, I avoid making any hot spots or creases in the metal. Alternatively, you can use your pliers here too. The best way to get a good shaping is to use multiple bends rather than just one big one. By slowly forming your piece, you can avoid making any tool marks and possibly making any creases. We want the best look possible here, right? Once we have a decently shaped part, we can bring down our corners and see if everything lines up. How are we doing? I think we look pretty good. If everything doesn't quite line up though, we can make some small adjustments with our pliers like this, and boom! There we have it, our seat's all complete! Let's go ahead and attach this in and make sure we have a really good connection. A little twist, twist. Awesome! Let's put our leather on. For the most part, this is incredibly straightforward. All we need to do is ensure that the leather goes towards the outside of our vehicle. By sliding our metal through these little slots in the leather, we can get a nice firm connection by bending our tabs up. Later on down the road, when it comes to connecting our roof, we'll follow a very similar method. Where things get a little trickier though is where we try to attach the leather right at the engine area. For this particular area, I recommend lining up your parts first and do your best to slide the metal with the leather into place. We only need to do this on the one side right now, so we have a little bit of play. Once we have this area nice and secure, we can work our way around the car and eventually get to the other side, where we can line up our leather with our metal and get this part connected. If you're still having a hard time here, it's okay to press a little bit outward just to get everything into place. Just don't overbend this area, because if you misshape it, our gears might move around and that could affect the movement of our car. Okay, looking pretty good. Now let's move on to our on and off switch. Unfortunately, I was missing one piece with my kit, the spacer for our on and off switch. This really had zero effect on the actual model's working ability, but it does help with the stability of the entire mechanism. Getting this whole on and off assembly into its proper place and formed correctly can be a little bit hard because all the pieces have to be bent just right for it to work. Keep in mind, this is one of those pieces that slides back and forth, and if it's not moving correctly, you're not going to be getting very far, are you? Getting the on and off assembly into place is also kind of hard because of the small space and odd shapes we have to deal with. One part of our on and off switch actually slides back and forth, stopping a gear in the back. This moving easily is super important. Once you do manage to get this part into place, you might find you need to make some small adjustments. Try to do this now while you still have enough space. Doing it later when you have to deal with more gears and steering is almost impossible. And that can also be said for our drive and reverse mechanism. For me, this was another big time dump area. These tabs were almost impossible to get bent over correctly, and I think that's mainly due to how thick the metal is. It's not impossible to shape and the mechanism does work, but it takes some time to really get it working correctly. Much like every part we've mentioned so far, and I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, this part needs to move smoothly, and if it doesn't, we need to make those small corrections now before we attach it onto our vehicle. One more pro tip here, I would recommend making sure that the tabs are as flush as possible to our gear here, and the reason for that is they'll provide some stability so that when the gear is moving back and forth, it will catch the right part in our mechanism. Speaking of catching mechanisms, let's talk about the power of our vehicle, the spring assembly. This is another area where paying attention to detail is super important. Why, you might ask? Well, because some of our pieces here look the same, but they're very much not. Both parts A and B here are used to grab the gears at different times. One is used to catch the spring as we wind our vehicle up, and the other one is used to drive it. Because both A and B are engaged at different times on the same gear, it's important to make sure that they're bent almost identical to the instructions for them to work correctly. Another thing to make sure we don't have here is movement in our gears. Because this is the primary power area, having any kind of slipping will affect the car's overall performance. And the way that we do that is making these little tabs here on the left and right as tight as possible against our gear. Having any kind of wobble in our gear will cause us performance issues later, so really make sure this area is nice and tight. Okay, that looks nice and strong. Now we need to install it. After bending our front and sides, we just need to line everything up with this leather piece like I talked about earlier. With just a little bit of finagling, it should go just right in. Let's tighten these connections up and boom! Time to move on to our autopilot mechanism. Groovers, I know I've said a few times throughout this build that these parts were complicated, but this one right here, I think caused me the most trouble out of all of them. I thought everything was tight. I thought everything was nice and lined up. Oh, but boy was I wrong, and didn't I have to go back to make a ton of adjustments. This part works by moving this lever up and down. This action engages and disengages a locking mechanism that stops the auto drive. These pieces need to be lined up pretty precisely for everything to work correctly here. Again, this cannot be understated. A lot of this part involves us bending things very precisely to the instructions detail. Take your time here, double check your work, look at the instructions a few times before moving on. This will save you a ton of time later. Nice and shiny, nice and shiny. Finally, let's talk about putting our gears and steering together. Our gear assemblies are really straightforward. We line up our pieces, create a cross, and then connect the gears to the proper orientation while securing it as tightly as possible. When it comes to placing them into our car, it's important again to ensure that everything lines up. You may need to move the gears back and forth just a little bit to get everything in the right spot. Try your best here not to accidentally bend any of the teeth on the other gears. If something gets misaligned inside, it can be a real pain in the butt to get it back in place. And if you accidentally warp or bend something inside, it might cost you a little bit of power later. This is especially true when it comes to our steering. Not only do we have to build the steering column to move our wheels, but we also have to bend our axles as well. Both of these parts require quite a bit of precision. Starting with our steering axle, you can see that we have to make a pretty unique shape here. Because the part is oddly shaped, getting it correctly formed is a little bit difficult. Also, forming this incorrectly can cause the tires to actually act as a brake, slowing down your car even more. Let's take a little bit more time here to really make sure this axle is nice and lined up, and we have the proper proportions on both sides. We can match our part to the green diagram to make sure that everything is as best as it can be before we secure it into place. Now we're going to put this part into our car. I recommend using tweezers for this just because we're navigating some tricky areas. Bend these little tabs over, and there we go, all installed. Just like our axle, our steering column is a weird shape too. This piece has a small little hook, and the angle of that hook really matters because the spring is going to actually catch there and help the car move left and right depending on where the wheels are moving. Because that spring helps control the steering, if this part isn't properly installed, you'll have your wheels either going to the left or right permanently. Having it in the middle and being able to move freely is our goal. I know a lot of other builders out there are having a hard time with this step, and I completely understand why. My best advice is just to slow down, take your time, and really make sure that all of your angles are correct. You can make some small adjustments once everything's installed. but it is a lot harder to really get those parts into the right place without accidentally misshaping something else. And if you do that, that causes more problems for you. So we are playing a bit of a game of give and take. Either take it out of the model and spend the time to rebend it, or take the risk of bending it in place and accidentally misshaping something else. The choice is yours, and so is the frustration. Once we have everything lined up and inserted into the proper place, there should be a small arm that reaches out over our autopilot area. If everything is tight and properly lined up, it should just fit touching that wheel. That little arm is going to help us engage and disengage that little driving mechanism that we built earlier. If you do have some movement in your autopilot gear, it might get in the way of this whole mechanism working now. Again, I had to do a lot of tinkering in this area to get everything working correctly, and it was because I didn't tighten this up all the way. I can't understate this, and I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record. Make sure everything is nice and tight before moving on. Okay, this is really coming along. Now, let's montage this to completion.
And there we have it, the Time for Machine Luxury Roadster.
This model is absolutely beautiful. Not just the design, but also the mechanical workings on the inside. If you're a metal model enthusiast, this is definitely one you want to have in your collection. But we're not done yet. I know that if you've reached this stage where you've completed everything, you might have a lot of tinkering ahead of you. And that's because these machines here require a lot of precision. Let's talk about some areas that I had some problems with, and maybe I can help you fix yours. Now, the problems that I had after everything was complete was the wheels dragging here on the front, and also that steering column that I was talking about there, kind of stopping everything from moving. Also, I had a little bit of an issue here with my automatic transmission and manual transmission not fully engaging all the way because that gear wasn't completely secured. How I went about fixing this was kind of either opening this up or taking these guys right out and using my tweezers here to kind of help me bend the metal the way I needed to have it done. If my tweezers weren't strong enough, I would switch over to the Time for Machine pliers and of course use those to make any adjustments that I needed. After making the adjustments here, I actually moved to the front end and realized, like I said, that these wheels were turning. And that turning motion, while one was going straight and the other one was kind of going to the right, was acting as a brake for me going forward and was making this whole mechanism not work. So what I did was I looked at the front and realized the tires were on the wrong way. So I switched them around and magically everything started to work just fine. And that can be said for a lot of things when it comes to Time for Machine models. These builds are not like any other models in the metal model community. These ones really do have to be built precisely for them to work, and every single part has to be orientated the proper direction. With some other metal models, like these guys back here, sometimes the orientation of the part isn't really that important. Here, it is crucially important, and if your car's not working, most likely there's something either reversed or just not engaging correctly. Outside of these few small adjustments, I was able to get this car working really well. And I know that some of you out there might be having some other issues, so please feel free to leave them in the comments down below and I'll do my best to give you a hand. Overall, when everything is said and done, can I recommend the luxury Roadster from Time for Machine? Yes, I can. This build was fantastic. I really enjoyed putting it all together, and this really does show off Time for Machines design and, of course, mechanical know-how. This build is definitely easier than the train or tank that we've built here on the show, so if you're looking to get into the Time for Machine models, you might want to look at this one first. Alright Groovers, that brings us to the end of our show. I had a really good time building the luxury Roadster with you, and if you guys had a good time, don't forget to press that like button. For more videos like this, hit subscribe as well, as we got all kinds of really cool content coming out in the future. Want to help the channel grow? Check out groovebuilders.ca. We have all kinds of really cool models on there at great prices with fast shipping to the United States and Canada. Until next time, Groovers, keep building. Now to add this guy to our nice and shiny collection.
Oh, it's so shiny.